Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into some really fascinating material focused on one of ancient Egypt's most captivating figures.
Absolutely. Our mission here is to unpack the incredible life and times of Amenhotep III. You often hear him called Amenhotep the Magnificent or the Great.
Right.
We're basically going to follow his journey, from his early years right through to his death and explore not just the man, but the vibrant world he shaped at the absolute peak of Egypt's power.
The magnificent. Yeah, that name alone tells you something, doesn't it? Think of this deep dive as your guide through the details in these sources, really helping you see what made this pharaoh and his era so significant for understanding ancient Egypt.
So let's jump right in. When we talk about Amenhotep III, who was this man behind the grand titles?
Good question.
He was born likely around 1401 BC, son of Thutmose IV, and interestingly, one of his minor wives, Mutemuia.
But the story of his birth, that gets kind of embellished later on, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Decades into his reign, Amenhotep commissions this really elaborate scene at Luxor Temple, and it depicts his divine birth.
Divine.
Yeah, the claim was that the god Amun himself took the form of Thutmose IV to father him with Mutemuia. What's fascinating is how early he starts laying the groundwork, claiming that connection to the supreme state god right from conception.
Wow, claiming divine parentage from the get-go. And very early on, just his second year, he makes a really significant marriage.
He does. He marries Tai, and she becomes his great royal wife for his entire very long reign.
And she wasn't royal herself, right?
That's what's remarkable.
Yeah.
She was the daughter of commoners, Yuya and Thuya. Definitely not the usual match for a pharaoh.
So how did he make sure everyone saw that marriage is, legitimate and powerful, given her background?
That's where let's call it the propaganda machine, really kicks in. He commissioned and distributed these objects we call them marriage scarabs.
Scarabs, like the little beetle amulets.
Well, yes, but these were large commemorative ones. They weren't just souvenirs. They were explicitly sent out to affirm both his divine power and the legitimacy of Tai. It was like a public declaration broadcast across the kingdom.
Huh. So scarabs weren't just trinkets, they were state communication tools.
Precisely. Really clever. They were used to announce major events and reinforce the royal image. The sources mention others too, like the ones commemorating his incredible lion hunts.
Lion hunts?
Oh yeah, the records claim he killed over 100 lions in just the first 10 years of his reign.
Wow.
Or the scarabs celebrating that huge artificial lake he built for Tai near her hometown. That was in year 11. He even personally rode the royal barge called Akhenaten on it.
Building lakes, hunting lions sounds like very carefully crafted acts, projecting power, virility, all essential for a ruler.
Absolutely. Especially because he probably became pharaoh quite young, maybe somewhere between 6 and 12 years old. So a regent would almost certainly have ruled for him initially, though we don't have a name explicitly mentioned in the sources. These public displays, documented on scarabs and monuments, were ways to, solidify his image as a strong, capable king right from the moment he took full control.
Okay, so his early reign is heavy on establishing that image. And you mentioned Tai was the great royal wife, but he had other wives too. Diplomacy must have been complicated.
Incredibly complex. And marriage was a key diplomatic tool back then in the late Bronze Age. The sources mention him marrying daughters of rulers from powerful places like Mitanni, Babylon, Arzawa.
Big players.
Definitely. Julukepa of Mitanni, for instance, arrived with this truly massive retinue, 317 women.
317. That's quite an entourage. Makes a statement.
It certainly does. But there's a fascinating bit in the Amarna Letters about his own daughters, isn't there?
Yes. This is where we see Amenhotep III's unique position. When the Babylonian king Kadashman-Enlil I asks for one of his daughters in marriage.
Right, preserved in Amarna Letter EA4. Amenhotep's reply was famously blunt, something like, "From time immemorial, no daughter of the king of Egypt is given to anyone."
He was happy to take foreign princesses, but absolutely refused to send his own daughters out. What does that tell us about his foreign policy, his view of the dynasty?
It's a remarkable power play, really. On one hand, marrying foreign princesses boosts Egypt's prestige and alliances, but on the other, keeping his own daughters home. Well, it could be a way to stop foreign rulers getting any potential claim or influence on the Egyptian succession through marriage. It maintained Egypt's unique, perhaps superior status.
And late in his reign, he even married his own daughters, Sidamun and Iset. We have sources like jar inscriptions showing Sidamun was elevated to great royal wife status alongside Tai. That practice can seem surprising to us.
It can, definitely, viewed through modern eyes. While incest was generally forbidden for ordinary Egyptians, it wasn't unheard of within the royal family itself. It might have been linked to trying to preserve the perceived purity of the royal bloodline, or maybe reinforcing the pharaoh's divine status, mirroring the gods who sometimes married their siblings.
Right.
It raises an important point about the distinct rules that seem to apply to the divine king compared to his subjects.
Speaking of divine status, his huge building projects must have been central to that idea. His main residence sounds incredible.
It really was. The palace complex at Malkata, meaning House of Rejoicing. Later it got renamed the Palace of the Dazzling Eighteenth.
Dazzling Eighteenth. That name feels significant, doesn't it? Especially knowing what comes next with his son. We'll get to that.
Definitely foreshadowing there. Construction started around year 11, and he moved in permanently much later, around year 29. And although it was built mostly of mud brick when it was finished, it was the largest royal residence in Egypt, period.
So Malkata wasn't just a palace, it was a center for major rituals, too.
Crucially, yes. It was the site for his said festivals. He celebrated 3 of them in his reign, year 30, year 34, and year 37.
3? That's extraordinary. Most pharaohs didn't even live long enough for one. What exactly was the purpose of these said festivals?
Well, the said festival was this ancient tradition, going way back to the Old Kingdom. It involved a series of tests and rituals meant to demonstrate the pharaoh's continued vitality and fitness to rule, usually after 30 years on the throne.
So it was a sort of royal checkup, but very public and ritualized.
Kind of, but much more profound politically and religiously. It involved these elaborate ceremonies reenacting ancient rites. The king would do things symbolizing his control over Upper and Lower Egypt, like symbolic dual coronations wearing the different crowns. The belief was that successfully completing the said festival elevated the pharaoh, took him from being near divine to achieving full divine status while staying on earth.
Wow. So not just celebrating a long reign, but a declaration of divine transformation. And the sources say he wanted his festivals to be particularly grand.
Yes, more spectacular than any before. He even brought in highly favored officials like Amenhotep, son of Hapu, to help plan them. They actually researched ancient records for the correct rituals and costumes.
Really going for authenticity and scale.
Exactly. It shows this deliberate effort to connect his reign back to the glories of the distant past, while also seriously amplifying the spectacle.
Amenhotep, son of Hapu. He's a fascinating figure himself. Not royal, but gained immense power.
Immense is right. He held loads of high offices: scribe, military commander, master builder. His influence was so great that he got this unprecedented honor, being allowed to build his own mortuary temple behind the king's own complex. That was usually reserved strictly for royalty.
That's incredible access.
And here's where it gets truly remarkable. Amenhotep, son of Hapu, was one of the very, very few non-royals in all of Egyptian history to be deified, actually worshipped as a god after his death. His power came from his administrative genius and the pharaoh's obvious favor. It really shows you the kind of ambitious, powerful individuals who populated Amenhotep III's court.
That speaks volumes about the trust and power Amenhotep III granted.
Okay, so beyond Malkata, his building program was just enormous, wasn't it?
Monumental doesn't even quite cover it. He ordered new quarries opened early in his reign just to supply the stone needed. He added significantly to the great temple complexes at Karnak, built new pylons, that magnificent colonnade at Luxor Temple. He was reshaping the sacred landscape.
Completely. He even dismantled some older structures, rearranging sacred spaces to enhance his own presence and his dedication to the gods, especially Amun. And he didn't stop at Egypt's borders. He extended Egypt's monumental presence deep into Nubia, covering the region with new temples.
But his own mortuary temple, the one on the West Bank at Thebes, ironically, it wasn't built to last.
That's one of the great paradoxes, isn't it? His mortuary temple was the largest religious complex in Thebes when it was built, huge. But he built it too close to the Nile floodplain.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, within just a couple of centuries, it was largely ruined by the annual flooding, and much of its stone ended up being, well, recycled by later pharaohs for their own buildings.
So all that's really left standing today are those famous guardian figures.
Exactly. The massive colossi of Memnon, those 2 enormous seated statues of him, are the most visible remnants of that vast complex. But he filled other temples with statues too, like the hundreds, literally hundreds of statues of the goddess Sekhmet placed in the Temple of Mut. His reign is just renowned for producing some of the absolute finest examples of New Kingdom statuary.
The sheer number is staggering, over 250 surviving statues of him, more than any other pharaoh.
It gives us this incredible visual record of him throughout his life. And speaking of statues, a really significant cache was found relatively recently, right, in the courtyard of his colonnade at Luxor Temple back in 1989.
What was so significant about that find?
Well, it included many magnificent pieces, like a nearly perfect pink quartzite statue of the king. Beautiful stuff. But what was particularly notable, historically speaking, was that the name of the god Amun had been deliberately chiseled out.
Where?
Wherever it appeared in the cartouches, those oval rings with the royal name on these statues.
Hacking out the god's name. That points directly to the revolutionary changes under his son, Akhenaten.
It absolutely does. It's clear physical evidence of that later campaign against the Amun priesthood, the attempt to erase the god's name. It shows how the dramatic shifts of the next reign directly impacted monuments from Amenhotep III's own era.
You mentioned earlier the name of his palace, the dazzling Aten, and his royal barge also had an Aten-related name. Was the sun disk, the Aten, already becoming important during his reign?
Very much so. Aten, the dazzling sun disk, wasn't just the barge name. It was a popular epithet for Amenhotep III himself. It showed up in his formal titles, the names of his palace, even military units. So yes, a strong connection to the solar disk was definitely developing and being emphasized during his reign, well before his son took it in that radical, exclusive direction.
It really feels like the seeds were being planted for what came next. And we're still finding things from his era today, aren't we?
We are. Just in 2021, a large ancient settlement was discovered near his mortuary temple. It's believed to be the city called the Dazzling Aten, the one he built to house the thousands of craftsmen, laborers, and administrators needed for his enormous building projects on the West Bank.
Finding the actual city.
Yeah, finding the bakeries, the houses, the cemeteries. It gives us this tangible connection to the sheer scale of his work and the society that supported it all. It's amazing.
So we have the monuments, the artifacts, the letters, even the cities. And thanks to modern science, we also have genetic studies now.
That's right. DNA analysis has been done on his mummy. It confirmed he's the father of the mummy identified as Akhenaten.
His successor.
Exactly. And also the grandfather of Tutankhamun. It also identified another mummy called the Younger Lady as both Akhenaten's full sister and the mother of Tutankhamun.
Wow, okay. Keeping it in the family.
Very much so. Now, while these studies confirm the direct family relationships, the more detailed genetic markers and what they might imply about, say, broader ancestral connections, those are complex points that scientists are still debating.
Understandable. So that brings us near the end of his long reign. Almost 4 decades on the throne.
His latest confirmed date is year 38, and he might have just lived briefly into year 39. We do have reliefs from late in his reign that show him appearing, well, weak and sick.
And the mummy confirms that?
Forensic examination seems to support it, yeah. It revealed evidence of significant health problems, things like painful abscesses in his teeth, obesity, arthritis. Not a comfortable end.
How old did they think he was when he died, based on the mummy?
The examination suggested somewhere between 40 and 50 years old. Interestingly, his powerful great royal wife, Tai, actually outlived him by quite a bit.
Really?
Yeah, she appears in the Amarna Letters, and was even seen at the royal table during Akhenaten's reign, at least a dozen years after Amenhotep himself had died.
His passing must have been a major event, both in Egypt and internationally.
Oh, absolutely. Foreign leaders sent condolences. The reaction of the Mitanni king to Shrada is recorded in the sources, and it's particularly telling. He said something like, "When I heard that my brother Nimerea, that was Amenhotep's throne name, had gone to his fate, on that day I sat down and wept. On that day I took no food, I took no water."
That really shows the immense personal and political standing Amenhotep III held on the world stage. Where was he eventually buried?
He was laid to rest in tomb WV22, which is in the western valley of the Valley of the Kings. It was the largest tomb there, actually, even designed with extra chambers that were likely intended for Tai and maybe Cinnamon, although it seems they weren't ultimately buried there.
And his mummy was moved later?
Yes, like many others, priests later moved it, probably seeking to protect the royal remains from tomb robbers and general unrest. It ended up in the KV-35 cache, which is where it was rediscovered in 1898.
And his mummy had some interesting features you mentioned.
Yeah, compared to others from his dynasty, it shows an unusual use of what's sometimes called subcutaneous stuffing. It's a technique used during embalming to fill out the body, make the mummy appear more lifelike under the wrappings.
Huh. Another detail in that carefully curated image, even in death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you might have even seen his mummy recently. It was part of that Pharaoh's Golden Parade in Cairo in 2021, moved with other royal mummies to the new National Museum of Egyptian Civilization.
Right. So what does this all mean when we look back at the reign of Amenhotep III? What's the takeaway?
Well, we've seen a pharaoh who presided over an era of truly unmatched prosperity, incredible artistic brilliance, and huge international prestige. He was a master builder, a diplomatic heavyweight, and a ruler who cultivated this powerful, divinely sanctioned image through everything from tiny scarabs to those massive Sed festivals. He really left Egypt at the absolute height of its power, a dazzling empire commanding immense respect across the known world.
He absolutely solidified Egypt's golden age. But despite leaving the kingdom seemingly so strong, so unshakable, his world, that world of, as the source puts it, quote, age-old political and religious certainties under the Amun priesthood, was almost immediately shaken to its core by the revolutionary changes brought in by his own son and successor, Akhenaten.
And considering all that immense power and ambition we've seen from Amenhotep III, his striving for divine status through monuments and rituals, and the stable, magnificent world he seemingly created, here's maybe a thought to leave you with. How does such a seemingly invincible reign, such personal power, ultimately interact with the unpredictable forces of succession and the potential for radical change, even coming from within the royal family itself?
It really makes you wonder about the true nature of legacy, doesn't it? And how much control anyone really has over how it endures or doesn't.